Postcards from Canada, a short story. With the reading public diminished these days, there is a surfeit of books, most of them garbage, circulating as second-hand. The dregs are destined for pulping. In large warehouses though, booksellers and remainder agents scout through boxes for anything remotely saleable, finally bundled with other books and sold for $1. The worst of it are coffee table and novelty books or merchandising publications. At Home with Michael Jackson, the Liberace Yearbook, along with the relentless flood of nasty novels considered popular romance. Some books you can't give away. But here and there are some classics and titles still in demand, and an astute bookseller who knows his clientele can stock up with second-hand gems and sell them at a nifty markup. The best material comes from deceased estates. A private library is boxed up and sold off holus bolus, disrespectfully. I like to amble among the second-hand stores to take advantage of this. It's not a bad thing that the reading public is diminished these days. It means the seriously bookish can find bargains. For example, I only recently snaffled an almost pristine copy hardback of Nigel Caro's The Tender Signet for a tender $10. On publication it must have sold for over $70. Regrettably, I am penny conscious and most new titles are out of reach. I will explain. I invested all my savings and inheritance in a venture with my brother Paul, but he and his boyfriend Alex swindled me and left me meagre. That is all I want to say about that. But one consequence was that my lavish taste for new titles had to be curtailed, and then I discovered the worthiness of the bargain tables. I also discovered Rob Neiman's pre-loved books on Chapel Street. Rob knew his game and was one of those booksellers with an eye for gems among the detritus. It was a dangerous place for me. I would sometimes have trouble paying my electricity bills because I'd blown all my wages that week at Rob Neiman's. Pre-loved books are cheaper, but that just means I buy more of them. One day I bought a copy of Taylor Garnett's Voodoo Crescendo, which turned out to be uneventful as a book, but inside it, as a bookmark, was a postcard from Canada. It had a glossy picture of a maple forest, red and golden on the front. The verso read, "Arrived Thursday. It was snowing. We are heading to Niagara Falls tomorrow. Staying in the hotel Jim recommended. All good. Love, Debbie and Ron." I like to say that one of the joys of pre-loved books are the inserts, and so I'm inclined to leave them embedded in the books with which they arrived. I put the postcard from Canada back in Voodoo Crescendo and give it no further thought. But I'm browsing at Rob Neiman's again a few months later and eagerly snapped up a good copy of The Opal Sky and Other Stories by D.T. MacDonald for $15. It was only after taking it home and sitting down to read it that I discovered, in its pages, as a bookmark, another postcard from Canada, the breathtaking mountainscapes of Ontario. The verso read, "A mix-up with our accommodation last week, but Ontario is worth it. You would love it here. Ron is in his element. The food is great, about the same prices as home. Might stay another few days. Love, Debbie and Ron." 2 books from the same collection. Much the same thing could and would happen with commercial bookmarks. I bought first one book and then another weeks later, and they had both belonged to the same person because they had left identical bookmarks with Wordsworth quotes and daffodils among the pages of both. Improvised bookmarks, train tickets, dried flowers, 4-leaf clovers and the like, are common of course, but occasionally there would be postcards and also more personal items such as notes and letters. On occasion, in fact, these turned out to be more interesting than the books they were in. I bought one dull title, for instance, and in its pages was an army discharge notice of some young man who apparently had mental health issues. In another disappointing volume, there was a newspaper cutting about 2 people lost at sea. One day at Rob Neiman's, I was considering a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Although pre-loved, it was pricey, or rather my finances were perilous. Should I dip into the rent money? It was a delightful volume, soft leather covers, a 1949 edition, rare. I left it, but went back the next day to be reckless with my rent. Inside the Rubaiyat, folded up very neatly on fine paper, was a letter. It read, "Dear Nell, things have not turned out as either of us planned. Everybody was caught up in the madness. I have no regrets. I would do everything the same all over again, even knowing it would end like this. You are perfect. I know you will say you can never look back. I will be erased. Life is very short though, Nell. Just a heartbeat. The sudden way Stella passed taught me that. There are only a few sweet moments given to any of us. I, at least, won't forget. Love, Charlie." The letter had possibly been there undisturbed since the 1940s. The handwriting was an old copperplate like my father's, the war generation. The letter, I thought, was poignant in the context of the book, the quatrains of which sing of life's brevity and implore us to find joy while we can. Possibly, I thought, this Charlie had given the book to Nell, perhaps as a parting gesture, along with a cover letter to underline his intentions. What was the madness everyone was caught up in? He and Nell met, they parted, or were drawn apart by circumstance, and he, Charlie, is determined not to regret it. To my mind, the letter added to the value of the book. I had 3 copies of the Rubaiyat. This was by far the nicest, and was worth the rent stress. Then, one day, again at Rob Neiman's, I bought a copy of Frida P. Longmuir's detective thriller Through the Humble Dust. Another postcard from Canada. Now Debbie and Ron were in Vancouver. Had to slow down. Ron's been having migraines, but arrived in Vancouver, which is spectacular. Meeting up with Jim's folks tomorrow. They're going to show us around. Can't wait to see you again. Love, Debbie and Ron." Presumably, Rob Neiman had acquired a whole box of books from some friend or relative of Debbie and Ron back in the day. I had a collection, stunning views of Canada. I started browsing through books at Rob's looking for others. I might even buy a book just for the postcard. I didn't find any. One day, though, when I strayed to Brisbane visiting my cousin, I was thumbing books on a bargain table at a store there and, just coincidentally, found a volume with another postcard from Canada. From Alberta, a 4-window glossy view of the gas-rich prairies. I turned it over to read the verso. It wasn't from Debbie and Ron. It was from a Lynette who wrote about a Roger who had been hunting. I bought the book. Postcards from Canada was a theme, and an odd one, I thought, since I had never met anyone myself who had been to Canada. Who goes to Canada? Apparently those who do go to Canada tend to be bookish. It was several years after this, several more years of book buying and browsing, and more straitened finances and no restitution from Paul and his boyfriend. It was the legal cost that killed me in the end. That I was again in Brisbane visiting the same cousin and found a small second-hand bookstore in the suburbs called The Written Gift. It was one of those dusty stores jam-packed with titles. The owner buys far more stock than he sells, but the selection is unfocused. There are a lot of those popular romance novels, a whole shelf of Courtney Bryce, but an unfamiliar selection all the same. The owner surely sourced his books from warehouses to which Rob Neiman back in Melbourne never ventured. At the time, I was on an oriental travel bent. I'd read Sterling Harding's Travels Through Siam and Sir Barnaby Lloyd's Journeys Through the Hindu Kush. I liked books that gave those journeys historical context too. It's a considerable literature, once popular with a more educated reading public at the tail end of the British Empire, usually in well-made hardbacks, but thrown out for a song in these diminished times. That day, I settled on a very tidy old volume, Treat the Moon as a Friend by G.D. Lincolnshire, non-fiction. It gave an account of the peoples of the Caucasus steppes, their customs, attire and habits. It was a gentle volume, with a discursus into botany and the relation of the exotic flora of the region to its long tradition of love song. It was not, that is, an academic work or heavy, but a work intended for the general but intelligent reader. There were a few photographs at the front, in sepia. After making the purchase, I caught a bus. It was while sitting on the bus, taking the book from its brown wrapper and thumbing through it to get further acquainted with its contents, that I found a letter neatly folded between the pages in the back third. The owner of the book, I had noticed, was C.N. Bodner, because he had penciled his name on the front flyleaf. I opened the letter and read it, another letter in wartime copperplate. Dear Charlie, I waited this long to write because I didn't know what still needs to be said. I still don't. For me, it is not a matter of regret or of forgetting, nor was it because I feel my life is slipping away and will be wasted. But I haven't risen from the ashes yet. Not yet. It was, as you say, the madness of the war. I know losing Stella was hard. I'm not bitter. They were sweet moments. Meanwhile, I have to settle into this new job now. Working in a big hospital is a change. Mum has also been unwell. I'm not complaining. Life will follow its own path. You taught me that. Yours, Nell. The echo seemed so unlikely that I missed it initially, but the name Nell rang the bell. This was the same Charlie of no regrets, and this was the Nell of the Rubaiyat. Again, the letter had possibly been there undisturbed since the 1940s among the books of C.N. Charlie Bodner. I could calculate the coincidence by supposing booksellers all dip into the same slush fund of junk and gems. Yet still the letters had been apart in years and miles just as much, it seemed, as Nell and Charlie themselves. Again, I like to say that one of the joys of pre-loved books are the inserts. You never know where an out-of-print, much-neglected, long-forgotten classic second-hand will take you. But there are also the things you find between the pages, because the pages of a book are a place of private intimacy, is a place to store keepsakes and memories, postcards from Canada and the like, letters you don't want to lose, but perhaps never want to read again.